Imagine this. Right now, as you lower your head onto the pillow, an immortal drama unfurls above your ceiling. To the ancient Greeks, the sky was never empty. It was a courtroom for thunder, a forge for storms, a stage where gods argued in star-bright voices. Zeus could fling a lightning bolt not at an enemy army, but into the path of your days, splitting routine like an oak in a tempest and redirecting your fate with a flash. The heavens were not distant. They were management, immediate, personal, watching. Maybe you carry their echo without knowing it. Perhaps your name, Helen, Jason, Phoebe, Alexis, Peter, walks out of their stories. Perhaps your birthday is stamped with their animals and heroes. Aries, the ram of daring quests. Gemini, the twins whose bond bent destiny. Leo, the lion that once haunted a hero's path. The very words you use hold their fingerprints. A muse for your ideas. A panic from Pan's wild shout. A titanic effort when you reach past human limits. You are already tied to them, even if you never asked to be. The old world hums beneath the wallpaper of the new. Tonight, we will travel through that humming. You'll meet the makers of thunder and tide, Zeus and Poseidon, the weavers of wisdom and war, Athena and Ares, the singers of love and sleep, Aphrodite and Hypnos, and the walkers of crossroads and shadow, Hecate, Pan, the fates who measure the thread of every life. We'll glide from chaos to cosmos, from titans to Olympians, from monster to meaning, and notice how their footprints still press our symbols, our speech, our dreams. Close your eyes now. Let the modern noise step back. Hear an olive grove breathing in the dark. A bronze lamp clinks softly against stone. The Aegean exhale beyond a sleeping shore. Inhale and exhale. With each slow breath, the traffic fades, the hours loosen, and the old stories rise like constellations. Gently, quietly, the night opens. To ancient Greece, imagine you are not in your bedroom at all. You are seated on the worn steps of Athena's temple, high on the Acropolis, where the stone remembers every sandal that ever crossed it. Night is gentle, and the city below is a soft constellation of hearths. A breeze moves across the hill, barely there, carrying a quiet of purpose, as if every olive leaf has agreed to whisper and no more. Listen first. A lone aulos sings from somewhere inside the sanctuary. Two pipes braided into one voice, thin and silver in the air. The melody walks, then lingers, then turns back on itself, like someone tracing a familiar path between altar and door. Beyond the hill, the Aegean breathes against the shore. The sea does not hurry. It presses and releases, a patient animal. Closer by, the olive trees answer one another with soft leaf speech, the delicate clatter of green upon green, like beads of rain crossing a roof. Now, notice the scents. Resin warms on the heads of torches, and the smoke is sweet, sticky with pine. It threads itself into your hair, your clothes, into the very thought of warmth. From the harbor, a faint briny edge arrives, the Aegean salt breath, clean, almost peppery. And from a nearby courtyard oven comes the most human smell of all, fresh bread, wheat of Demeter, risen and split, its crust singing as it cools. That fragrance folds into the night like a promise that tomorrow will be simple. Grain, water, fire, and patience. Feel the world. Under your palm, the marble is cool, a moon-kept temperature. The stone has a soft polish where countless pilgrims leaned their weight, and a rough, honest edge where masons' tools once bit. Your feet register the sand's roughness through thin soles, the grit that means the earth is real. Across your shoulders, the day's sun still lingers, a memory of heat, mild now, spread thin as a shawl. When the breeze returns, it does not startle. It moves like a kindly teacher, smoothing pages, turning the page without a sound. Look at the light. The altar flame trembles as if adoring the air itself. Its motion is small, contained, respectful. Shadows gather behind column and lintel, but they are patient shadows, content to be arranged. Over all of it, the moon rests above the Parthenon, a pale coin placed carefully on a dark cloth. Marble drinks this light and gives it back softer, so that edges become invitations instead of orders. Far away, the sea takes a path of silver, a thread stitched from horizon to shore. Breathe in time with what surrounds you. Inhale with the sea's advance. Exhale with its retreat. Inhale the pine's sweet torch smoke. Exhale the day's noise. The present relaxes its grip. A hush takes the measure of your shoulders and finds them right. You begin to hear other textures, the low murmur of priests within, syllables rounded by stone, the small clink of bronze as a lamp's chain settles against its ring, sandals meeting steps in a measured rhythm, workmanlike, unafraid. Somewhere a child laughs and is hushed, not with scolding, but with a palm that says, "Listen." Even the statues seem to listen. The goddess calm behind her shield, the horse's neck arched not in pride, but in readiness to rest. If you look down into the city, you see streets drafted by moonlight. A cat writes its quiet script along a wall. Vines make dark ladders up a courtyard trellis. The air is a bowl, and sound is poured sparingly into it. Every place holds itself with care. Let your thoughts move as slowly as that allos line. Let them double back. Let them linger where the torchlight thickens, where the bread-carrying slave turns a corner and vanishes into a warmth of door. Imagine touching the column drum and feeling history like rings in wood, each layer a season of devotion, each layer an answering hand. This is the bridge in time. The Acropolis wind, barely a presence, crosses your face the same way it crossed faces 2,000 years ago. Your breath joins a long procession of breaths, priests, potters, sailors, mothers, children, all meeting the same cool marble with the same mix of awe and ease. The city's names have shifted, its hearts have not. Above you, constellations keep their slow grammar. The gods are not marching. They are waiting for you to arrive at a quieter speed. Listen again. A final phrase from the aulos hangs, then dissolves into the olive leaves. The altar fire nods, as if satisfied with your attention. The moon edges a degree higher, or perhaps you only feel it so. Your body learns the rhythm of this place. Press, release, glow, shadow, warmth, breeze, inhale, exhale. You are ready to go further in, not by walking, but by softening. The steps beneath you are steady. The night is kind. The stories will meet you where you are and carry you the rest of the way, gently and without hurry. I speak as one candle speaks to another. My name does not matter as much as my task. I was a boy of the city, then a student of the sanctuary, then a keeper of small flames. I learned to clean the altar before I learned to write my name without a wobble. I learned the patient weight of silence, the way it holds a room steady. And I learned how to listen for footsteps that do not leave dust. When I was little, the first story of the gods that ever found me wore the shape of a storm. It came down from the hills, flattened into black, a lid pressed gently over day. My father gathered me in from the courtyard where figs were drying on shallow trays. The wind found the olive leaves and turned them silver, one side dark, one side bright, like 1,000 tiny fishes changing direction. Somewhere above us, the city's roofs began speaking in clay. I asked if the sky was angry. He shook his head and set a lamp upon the table, though there was still light enough to see. Not angry, he said, only busy. Zeus is arranging things. A child hears arranging and imagines hands. The first thunder was a far drum, a long roll, the kind that starts in the stomach and finds the bones. It was large enough to make my name feel small. Then the rain arrived, and the smell of dust turning to earth, and the sound of gutters remembering why they were cut. I cried because the bolt was too bright, and my father did not laugh. He set his palm on my back, between my shoulder blades, and said, "Inhale, then exhale." He timed my breath to the rain. He timed my fear to the count of his fingers. "Listen," he said. "Zeus speaks in a language you can learn. When he is close, he lights the world. When he is far, he only clears his throat. Everything in its order." By the time the storm reached the sea and softened into threads, I understood a little. The god was not the noise. The god was the order in the noise. I carried that order with me when I climbed, years later, to the hill of the goddess, to serve in the temple where stone has the memory of water. I became an apprentice to a priest, which is to say, I became a student of timing and tenderness. My mornings began with cool marble and the respectful scrape of reed brooms. We polished bronze bowls until they showed the room as a warm blur. We learned to move without the clatter of impatience. My teacher, an old man with a voice that could quiet birds, said that a sanctuary is a teaching about care. "You are not feeding statues," he told me. "You are feeding attention." I learned to lay out bread for Demeter, not as food for a mouth, but as gratitude given a shape. I poured water for Poseidon, centering my hand so the stream would not splash the rim. I kept a small cloth, ready for spilled wine. Dionysus forgives, the floor does not. I set a pinch of salt for the sea and a pinch of ash for the mountain, and felt, with each small gesture, the netting of a world. The gods were not far. They were cadence. Each day taught that rhythm is a kind of mercy. In the courtyard, a young olive tree grew in the angle of two walls. It made its first fruit the year I arrived, hard green ovals tasting of sun and impatience. I watered it often, because the gardener said tending a tree teaches the breath. Slow in, count. Slow out, count. While I watched it, I learned the names of winds, the character of light at different hours, the habits of small lizards that claim the warm stones near noon. I learned the city by its sounds, the hawker of figs with his long note, the blacksmith's hammer, the distant clapping of sandals when a procession formed, the aulos somewhere always practicing a ribbon of melody. The world kept arriving, and I kept being taught to welcome it. There came a day when the priests prepared the courtyard for a festival of Aphrodite. The air filled with garlands, laurel and myrtle, and with the quiet glow of copper polished to daylight. The goddess of love, they told me, does not hoard beauty. She lends it. He lends. She is most herself when beauty is shared. I was set to carry a basket of petals and to scatter them along the stones where women would walk in from the city with offerings of honey. As I worked, I saw a girl passing with her mother. She was no statue, only dust on her hem, and a strand of hair that would not be braided. But this ordinary grace moved through the courtyard like a small boat moved by a steady wind. I felt my chest rise not with want, but with a kind of permission. The priest saw my face and smiled. "Aphrodite," he said, "is not a storm. She is a softening. See how people hold their shoulders differently today? See how voices choose roundness over edge? I did see. The city became almost transparent. Kindness showed through. Later, the women placed mirrors before the altar. Small, polished discs that returned every face as a quiet translation. The priest asked me to hold one up so that it caught the lambent flame and threw a trembling halo onto the stone. Beauty, he said, is the gentleness of attention. To attend is to love. I thought of the storm and its order, of how my father's hand had steadied my breath. I began to understand that gods speak the way the world speaks when we listen properly. They are not visitors, they are tones. My study deepened. We practiced reading the sky, where birds turned, how they climbed, how they folded their wings into a dive. Not to command fate, the old man said, but to become literate in the chapter we are living. A farmer reads soil, he told me, and we read omens for the same reason he reads soil, to know how to be kind. So we watch the shadow of the Parthenon slide across the day, and the drift of incense teach the breeze how to curl. We learned when to speak, when to sweep, when to sit. I found that fear of Zeus returned at times when the summer steamed and the clouds piled high like ships dragging mountains behind them. Yet fear would arrive now as a guest, announced, not as an intruder. I knew its name. I had a chair ready. I would set down my tools, step to the threshold, and count. 1, 2, 3, from the flash to the sound. Closer, I would think, or farther. And in naming the distance, I discovered space inside myself, a room in which the thunder could finish its sentence without knocking me over. In that room, I felt a clarity that was new. It was not that Zeus aimed bolts at my life, but that life itself cracked open at times to pour light across what I thought I knew. After such flashes, things stood cleaner, as if recently washed. I learned to recognize Aphrodite again and again, not in a single face, but in a gesture. A hand steadying an old man's elbow as he stepped from curb to street. A mother taking time to braid her child's hair with a ribbon the color of pomegranates. A potter pinching the lip of a bowl until it felt inevitable to the fingertips. The goddess came in mercies so small they needed attention to be seen. The more I saw them, the more the city felt held. There were evenings in the sanctuary when the priest sent me to the roof to watch for the first star. She is a letter, he would say, and we cannot begin the reading until she is found. Up there, above the fig trees and courtyards, I felt the city flatten into a map of scents. Bread and goat's milk, lamp oil and lavender, salt and iron. I learned to count time by the temperature of stone under my palm. As the moon lifted, its light turned marble into something like water that had chosen not to move. In that stillness, even my thoughts began to slow. I waited, and I saw that waiting held a joy all its own. There was a day when the sea itself came to teach me. A merchant caravan had arrived, and with it, sailors who had read Poseidon in the breadth of waves and the moods of currents. They told stories of sudden calms that felt like blessings, and of waters braided with green fire where the oars stroked. One sailor placed a shell in my hand, the curve smooth as a slept-in sheet, the edge fine enough to whisper. "Put it to your ear," he said, "and you will hear the god." I laughed, thinking he meant the old joke, how the sea pretends to live inside the shell. I listened anyway. I did not hear the ocean. I heard space. The shell held a room lined with silence and the faintest suggestion of wind passing a doorway. It was the architecture of notice itself. "You hear it?" the sailor asked. I nodded. Good. Then when you stand at the water, remember the shell. Let the wide sound fall into the small sound inside you. That is how he speaks without frightening you. As months unfurled, I learned the names of other presences. Athena, in the quickness with which an answer found me while a question was still warm. Hermes, in the way a message arrived exactly when it was needed. Hestia, in the unwavering center of a kitchen. Artemis, in the cool mercy of shade after heat. I learned to thank Hypnos when he lifted the tense nets from my shoulders and set them aside so sleep could walk in untroubled. And on crossroads, where the dust shows many choices, I laid 3 small stones for Hecate, not to be spared decisions, but to be granted the patience to stand inside them until the right one warmed in my hand. In time, the priest sent me out with a procession. We moved through streets that bore the city on their backs like strong old animals. The people watched us pass, fishmongers creasing afternoon with jokes, boys stopping their game to hold still, women at their doors brushing flour from their palms. We did not ask for sudden miracles. We would not have recognized them anyway. We asked for a tender city, where law could be firm without hardness, where strength could bow toward kindness without fear. At a fountain, an old woman who knew hunger placed 2 figs in my hand. For your goddess, she said, and for you. I offered 1 fig to the altar later and ate the other slowly, tasting each seed like a small yes. One night, as summer leaned into harvest, a storm walked in from the north with the steady stride of someone expected. I felt it before I saw it, the way a room changes its mind right before a guest arrives. The lamps were lit, the doors latched. The first thunder arrived as a long exhalation, a resignation of heat. The priest and I stood in the doorway and looked out at the city, where every roof made a small drum, and every alley counted drops. "Do you still fear him?" he asked, not teasing. I listened to the roll, the pause, the reply. I watched the light make brief sketches of the temple's columns and the vines trembling on their trellis. "No," I said, and was surprised to hear it. "I welcome him." The old man nodded. "Then you are learning the god and not just his name." In the quiet, after the storm, the streets lifted the smell of stone newly washed. A dog shook rain from its back. Somewhere, a door opened, and a woman laughed as if morning had arrived 3 hours early. The aulos began again, tentative after the rain, like a bird testing the edge of a branch. I wiped the threshold, gathered the scattered petals that had clung to wet stone, and felt a softness in my chest that did not need explaining. The world was arranged, at least for an hour. It was enough. You who are listening now, you feel some part of this already. Perhaps you have known a door that, when you approached it, recognized you and opened without your hand. Perhaps you have felt a name arise in your mind at the exact moment you needed it, and found the friend calling you. Perhaps you have seen morning light fold itself into your kitchen like a blessing that cost nothing. These are not accidents, or if they are accidents with habit. That habit is what we, in our city, called the gods. I do not say the gods live in statues or in thunder alone. I say they live where your attention becomes gentle enough to notice what is always arriving. They live in the respectful grip of a hand on a jar, in the way bread cracks and sighs when it cools, in the sound a broom makes when it decides to be a broom and not a stick. They live when fear is taught to sit, and when desire is invited to breathe, and when grief is brought water and a chair. They live in order that does not crush, and in beauty that does not demand. They are presences you can walk among without armor. So I, a former boy with a storm in his eyes, an apprentice with oil on his sleeves, a caretaker of small things, take your hand now and place your palm on the stone step I once knew. It is cool. The night has settled into its shape. The moon has given each edge a softer word. Somewhere, the sea writes on the shore and then erases itself so the next line can be written. Somewhere, a priest is teaching a new boy to count between lightning and thunder and to hear what is being offered, not threatened. Somewhere, a woman ties a ribbon in a child's hair and makes a small home for Aphrodite to sit in for a moment and rest. Inhale with me and feel the olive leaves agree to whisper. Exhale and feel the city lean toward kindness. Inhale and remember your father's hand, or any hand that steadied you. Exhale and leave the door open a little wider for sleep. The gods are not far. They have never been far. They are here in the pace we are choosing now, in the patience that gathers like dusk, in the way your breath becomes a bridge. You are ready. Gently, we will walk from name to name, from story to story, not to prove anything, not to argue, but to feel how each presence teaches the world to become itself, and how, as you listen, you become a little more yourself as well. In our city, the gods did not hover far above the rooftops. They sat at the table with the bread and the olives and were invited to stay by the way we treated one another. We did not point at the sky and say elsewhere. We looked at the market, the courts, the fields, the theater, the harbor, the hearth, and we said, here. A temple could be a mountain of marble, yes, but it could also be a well-kept threshold, a cup of water shared, a word given and kept. The gods were the names we gave to the patterns that made life livable, and the city learned to move in time with those names. Zeus was the highest of those patterns, our roof and our limit. He was storm, yes, but he was also oath. When citizens gathered in the assembly to speak about ships, or taxes, or treaties, they did so under the open sky, as if to make their voices available to thunder's counsel. The presiding officer poured a thin libation and said words that braided human promise to the listening air. To swear by Zeus was not to threaten lightning. It was to accept accountability that outlives convenience. A deal made under Zeus Horkios, the Zeus of oaths, was not mere parchment. It was a bridge you committed to maintain, stone by stone, long after applause died. The city learned a soft strength from this, that rules are not cages, but shared rhythms. Even the magistrate's staff, polished by many palms, did not command by fear. It reminded. Zeus was the way we agreed to be larger than our temper. If Zeus steadied the top of the house, Athena furnished the rooms. She was our patroness, not only because her statue stood tall, but because her mind taught our hands. She showed us how to make decisions at a pace equal to thought, neither rushed into harm nor stalled into loss. In the law courts, she lived in fairness, the weighing of testimony, the patience of listening, the willingness to revise. In workshops, she lived in craft, a potter's thumb, teaching clay its curve, a carpenter's line trued against the grain's hidden river, a weaver counting the under-over of a complicated pattern until order emerged like music. The city loved Athena because she asked no crawling. She asked competence. Under her gaze, girls learned to read shape and proportion at the loom. Boys learned that good armor is not only strong, but well-balanced. and elders learned that advice, to be wise, must be kind. We carried a woven robe to her each year, the peplos made by many hands over many days. When we lifted that cloth together, the city felt itself a single garment, different colors, one warmth. Demeter fed us in ways that made gratitude the most sensible emotion. The fields beyond our walls were her book, and we learned to read it season by season. The way plowed earth holds the smell of rain like a brown music. The way barley shivers as if remembering the sea. The way straw underfoot writes a dry winter song. Demeter taught us the moral of intervals, that fallow is not failure, but preparation, that a seed's darkness is part of its journey toward light. In her name, we shared first fruits so that no table would be entirely empty, and we left the corners of fields unharvested so that strangers might glean with dignity. At her festivals, the city became a kitchen of the open air. Flour on forearms, laughter folded into dough, ovens breathing out the bread that makes the rest of life possible. Mothers told children, as they broke a loaf, "Remember who raised this from ground to hand." And the children nodded, crumbs bright at the lip. And then there was Dionysus, who taught us the art of loosening, not decadence, not damage, but the loosening by which tight hearts become able to hear. His cup, never pure wine, always tempered with water, traveled into our winter like a small ember of summer. In his honor we sang, and we theatered. Under the god's ivy, masks hung on their pegs like spare faces, and the chorus learned to walk as one breath. We went to the plays not to escape our troubles, but to organize them. The stage widened grief until it could be held, sharpened laughter until it was useful, turned private confusion into public recognition. Even the satyrs painted on vases, goat-legged, flute-mad, reminded us to forgive the untidy, to welcome the foolish hour that frees the wiser one. Dionysus was also the god of forgetting, not erasing memory, but letting the body set down the sack it cannot carry into sleep. Many nights, after the last line fell, we stepped into the street lighter than we had entered, ready to be citizens again. Between the gods and us moved many beings who stitched the world together with their moods and songs. Satyrs lived at the edge of order, quick to dance, quicker to laugh, guardians of the necessary ridiculous. Their images in the theater whispered that without the playful, the solemn becomes brittle. Nereids, the sea nymphs, were the sea's lifted syllables. Fishermen pouring a libation into the surf would call to them by name, not to bend the tide, but to greet its temper. Centaurs appeared on painted cups in scenes of feasts and fevers, a caution and a hope. A man part animal is danger. An animal part man is possibility. The image asked us to keep the human seated in the animal tended in the human. The charities, the graces, moved like soft answers through the market, making exchange a pleasure instead of a contest. A fair price offered without haggling, a fig added to the measure without announcement. These were the graces at work. And the muses? They were the quiet nine who taught us that memory is a garden, not a warehouse. Poets spoke their names before speaking anything else, because to remember well is to live well, and the city's heart beats more calmly when told a beautiful truth at the right time. Rituals were how we rehearsed this calm together. They were less about spectacle than synchrony. Each dawn, hearth smoke rose from 1,000 homes at nearly the same hour. That shared lift was a civic heartbeat. At street corner shrines, we pinched flour and salt. At larger altars, we offered oil and song. A libation at a meal, wine poured first to the floor, reminded us that gratitude begins the feast. Processions taught us how to walk in each other's company, not crowding, not dawdling, an agreement of ankles. When a child was born, voices carried its name outward, so that walls and neighbors would learn the syllables together. When someone died, the city learned to lower its volume, to make a lane for grief to pass without jostling. We kept the flame of Hestia at the city center, and from that steady hearth, new fires were taken to new households, so that private warmth had a public source. A city is a geometries of roofs. A community is a circulation of warmth. Festivals tied months together like beads on a string. At the Panathenea, we wove and carried the peplos to Athena. Athletes ran with torches, not to conquer each other, but to convey flame, passing it hand to hand as if passing trust. At the city Dionysia, the entire polis entered a shared dream. Citizens jurying plays, poets competing not for money, but for memory. The city spent itself on song and staging because it knew the return. Strangers leaving as neighbors, neighbors leaving as better neighbors. The Thesmophoria, for women, honored Demeter with days of retreat and renewal. The city learned to rely on the wisdom of half its heart. And on the Eleusinian road, lit by torches, we walked not toward explanation, but toward tenderness with the unknown. Wheat sheaves lifted, water tasted, a kernel held. I will not say what was said there. I will say that people came back kinder to bread and to one another. Markets were sanctuaries of their own. Beneath awnings, Hermes watched over weights and measures, over rumors and honest news, over the coin that changed hands and the stories that did too. A cheated scale could be hidden from a buyer, but not from the god. Better to keep the measure true and the daylight. The stones of the agora learned our footsteps so well they could have guided us with eyes closed. To the potter you trusted because his cups never leaked. To the old woman whose herbs always smelled of hills. To the fishmonger who packed the silver catch in sea-wet reeds as if returning it home. In such places, the gods of small decencies worked hardest. Charities again, and Hestia in the glow of a brazier where a seller warmed his hands and offered warmth to yours. At the crossroads, where choices braided and unbraided, we left 3 smooth stones for Hecate, and sometimes a little honey cake at night. We did not bribe. We acknowledged. Choice requires a lantern. A city that honors its crossroads, literal and moral, finds fewer lost children. On hillsides, where shepherds napped at noon, Pan held the hour safe if you respected its stillness. Sudden shouting in those minutes could trip the pulse into panic, and we learned to move gently in the green shade. Down at the harbor, Poseidon was greeted with salt and water, strong rope and respect. We taught our boys to coil a line as carefully as they spoke a prayer, because a good coil and a good prayer both prevent knots later. The theater was our school of empathy, calm by other means. Under Dionysus's vine shadow, the city tried on other lives. A mother on a cliff of decision, a king learning to remove his crown from his ears so he could hear, a messenger whose words weighed more than he could carry. When the chorus sang, it was everyone and no one, which is another way to say us. We cried where we would otherwise have clenched. We laughed where we would otherwise have lied. And then we went home and poured a libation to the God who had organized our feelings without humiliation. Sleep followed more easily on such nights. The city breathed out as one chest. In homes, the gods were daily company, a herm at the doorway, stone pillar topped with a calm face, reminded travelers and hosts that hospitality is Zeus's other name, Xenios, the guardian of guest and giver alike. A lamp kept for Hestia at the hearth taught us that warmth is not an accident, but a duty fulfilled one refill at a time. A child learned to kiss the lintel, not to appease a plank of wood, but to greet the habit of coming and going with care. We chalked a calendar, not with deadlines, but with dawns. New moon for beginnings, full moon for gratitude, certain days to visit parents, certain days to mend what would not mend itself. A city becomes peaceful when its days carry ritual the way a body carries breath, without fuss, with faithfulness. Even in our laws, the divine wore practical shoes. An oath sworn in court invoked Zeus not to frighten, but to bind speech to consequence. A decision reached slowly, with everyone heard, honored Athena's love of clarity. Land set aside for the poor to glean during harvest honored Demeter's preference for enough over excess. Wine watered before it filled cups honored Dionysus's wish that joy be shared and survived. The gods did not need slaughter to be satisfied. They asked for right proportions. Salt scatter and song, order and release, labor and festival, public and private, courage and mercy. When we kept those proportions, the city walked without a limp. The creatures of story, satyrs, nymphs, centaurs, did not frighten our children so much as inform them. A boy who ran too headlong was teased, hooves showing, and he would laugh and slow. A girl who sang well was said to have a muse asleep in her throat. She learned to treat her voice as a guest. A spring in the hills was said to be a nymph's resting place. We kept it clean, not from fear, but from esteem, and the water tasted better for it. Stories grew like vines over stone, softening the city's edges until law and love could sit comfortably together. When ships returned, we thanked Poseidon and paid the gods of skill their due. The carpenter who knew where to place a rib, the sailmaker who listened to the cloth, the helmsman who steered by a planet's slow argument across the night. When fields gave us less than hoped, we did not accuse Demeter. We asked what we had failed to notice. The soil tired, the ditch clogged, the seed saved incorrectly. Gods may be vast, but they prefer partners, not petitioners. This made us more awake to the ordinary, and the ordinary became more gracious. There were sanctuaries for healing where the god Asclepius waited in courtyards lined with laurel, and there too sleep was a teacher. Sick and worried, people lay down on smooth stone with a rolled cloak under the head. A priest whispered a prayer and left them to the god's quiet. Dreams arrived like gentle physicians, a river to cross one step at a time, a knot dissolving in warm water, a door that opens when you say your own name kindly. Many woke better, not because magic struck them in the night, but because attention had been restored to breath and body, to pace and patience. Even illness learned to bow in such places. Across these patterns, the city learned a useful humility. We did not claim to command the gods. We claimed to join them by imitation, to be as orderly as Zeus without being hard, as thoughtful as Athena without being cold, as generous as Demeter without losing prudence, as joyful as Dionysus without losing tomorrow. Our myths were not commandments nailed to a wall. They were habits rehearsed in chorus until a single voice could sing them alone at a kitchen table. If you listen now, you can hear how a community is braided. Oath and counsel, seed and loaf, song and forgetting, market and harbor, crossroads and home. The satyrs keep us laughing, so earnestness does not crack. The nereids keep the sea dear, so food keeps its face. The centaurs keep wildness named, so it can be guided. The graces keep commerce smiling. The muses keep stories growing in the right direction. And over it all, Zeus keeps the roof honest. Athena, the rooms wise. Demeter, the pantry kind. Dionysus, the evenings gentle. Breathe with the city for a moment. Inhale as the torches of a procession tilt into the same wind. Exhale as the chorus concludes and the hill releases a single satisfied murmur. Inhale with the harvest carried through the gate. Exhale with the last libation poured to the earth. You are not outside this pattern. Your breath is another citizen walking home. When a people share gods like this, they learn to share time. The calendar is not a chain, but a river with known bends. The festival here, the harvest there, the quiet season where the hearth does most of the talking. We learn together when to lift our eyes and when to lower our voices, when to cheer and when to carry a neighbor's basket without being asked. We learn that community is not an idea, but a dozen daily gestures performed with a little ceremony, a little music, and a little mercy. And so, if you are listening in your own room, far from our hills, know this. The way you keep a promise, the way you make a cup of tea for a tired friend, the way you forgive a small clumsiness and let the day go on, these are rituals too. They are friendly to sleep because they are friendly to life. The old names you have heard tonight are not demanding attendance in marble halls. They are asking you to notice the patterns that already hold you. Inhale gently. Let the city of the past step back a pace, but not vanish. Exhale and feel your own room become a kinder polis. A lamp like a hearth, a window like a harbor, a bed like a sanctuary of Asclepius, where good dreams practice their craft. When you are ready, we will walk on to the larger perspective, to see how these patterns traveled through centuries, changing their clothes, keeping their hearts. For now, rest a little in the soft traffic of a city moving together, one breath at a time. History, like the sea at night, moves in long, patient swells. Greek myth is one such swell. It rose in little harbors, village fires, shepherd paths, island coves, and then carried whole civilizations across centuries. If you listen closely, you can hear how it worked, how story trained thought, how ritual shaped art, how names became architecture, how memory traveled from Athens to Rome to Paris to Boston, and into the words you use without thinking. Breathe in slowly. Let this part arrive, like tide over sand. From mythos to logos, that is how our teachers describe the shift in Greece, from story to reason. But the truth is calmer and more braided. The earliest philosophers did not throw away myth. They learned to speak beside it. Heraclitus watched the world burn and renew, and spoke of fire as a principle. Yet when he sought a name for order, he used one with the gravity of a god, Logos. Parmenides stepped into a chariot and traveled, in vision, to a goddess who taught him the path of what is. Plato, when reasoning reached its cleanest glass, still set a myth at the end to carry the mind where argument could not stand alone. Even Aristotle, patient lover of categories, turned to tragedy, to masks and choruses, to explain how a city purifies itself by watching grief move in public and then breathe again. They did not dismiss myths. They domesticated them for thinking, trimming the wildness only enough to befriend it. Theater was where myths learned civic manners. Under Dionysus's vine, Athens practiced conversation with its own conscience. Aeschylus took the thunder of old stories and forged law out of it. blood feud transmuted into trial. Sophocles set a king and a city at angles to each other so we could compare justice to mercy without shouting. Euripides let the gods arrive, not always as saviors, sometimes as mirrors, and showed how desire can dress itself as wisdom. Comedy, too, kept watch. Aristophanes teased philosophers and generals so the city would not grow vain. We called it entertainment. It was a school. Myth supplied plots and names. Theater taught proportion. How much grief is too much? How much pride a crack in the dam? How much compassion the width of a bridge? After a day in the sun market, after a day in the courts, people sat together and learned to feel at the same rhythm. Sleep came cleaner on such nights. In art, myth gave the body a purpose beyond posture. Pottery turned into a library. Black figure oarsmen rowing toward fate. Red figure heroes teaching courage by the bend of an elbow. Sculptors listened to gods with their hands. The Kouros and Kore learned how to stand so that standing became a prayer. Later, Polykleitos wrote a canon, a rule of measured limbs so that the body could be read like a poem. Phidias filled a pediment with a calm that was not stillness, but containment. Horses at dawn, gods in conversation, the city meeting its protectress as if greeting itself. Myth taught marble where to relax and where to hold. Even the small things, seal stones, coins, hairpins, carried faces and symbols that turned pockets into little chapels of memory. Architecture made those memories inhabitable. A temple was a recipe in stone. Doric, if you wished for strength and reserve. Ionic for grace and thought. Corinthian when leaves felt right at the capital because life insisted on climbing. Proportion was not decoration, it was ethics. Columns spaced with care taught a passerby to carry that care into speech. The Parthenon did not loom. It breathed, gathering the hill and the sea and the sky into a single practiced exhalation. Even stoas, those long porches where merchants and philosophers both found shade, were civic promises. There will be room for you to think and to trade, to wait out a shower, to meet a friend. Myth gave these places their stories. Architecture made the stories daily. From Greece, the swell moved to Rome, where names changed clothes but kept their bones. Zeus learned to answer to Jupiter, Hera to Juno, Athena to Minerva, Ares to Mars, Hermes to Mercury, Aphrodite to Venus, Poseidon to Neptune, Demeter to Ceres, Artemis to Diana, Hephaestus to Vulcan, Hestia to Vesta, Dionysus to Bacchus, Hades to Pluto. The Romans were engineers of both roads and religion. They built bridges between their duties and their desires. In the Aeneid, Virgil braided Greek story to Roman destiny, a refugee founding a city that would keep law as carefully as a farmer keeps a furrow straight. Ovid, with his Metamorphoses, taught Europe to see identity as a river, bodies turning into trees and birds, and stars not to escape themselves, but to continue. Household religion, the Lares and Penates, kept hearth and pantry under small, homely gods, cousins of Hestia's calm flame. In forums and baths, on triumphal arches, mythic scenes explained power to itself, strength justified if yoked to order, victory acceptable if paired with restraint. The swell did not break when the empire did. It rolled on into Byzantine mosaics, where old gods hid in patterns, into monastic libraries where scribes, suspicious but dutiful, copied pagan lines to keep human memory unbroken. Medieval thinkers allegorized the myths, not to flatter them, but to redeem them. Hercules labors as the soul's efforts, Orpheus as eloquence, Venus as the test of temperance. When Europe thawed into the Renaissance, Myth stepped into daylight again, wearing color. Botticelli's Birth of Venus and Primavera. Grace taught as a sequence of gestures, bodies learning to be light. Michelangelo carved gods because human muscle still makes sense as a sentence about heaven. Raphael frescoed them, so thought would have company on the wall. The point was not nostalgia, it was permission. To read nature as if she were articulate, to build cities where beauty and reason could recognize each other. Neoclassicism turned the recipe into a language for nations. Winckelmann praised noble simplicity and quiet grandeur, and Europe answered with columns, museums that announced themselves as temples of the civic mind. Courthouses with pediments telling the law that it serves a story older than statute. Libraries like stoas, promising shade for thought. In the United States, that language traveled across the Atlantic and put its hand on public buildings, the Capitol, the Supreme Court, the facades of universities and museums, so that a young nation could speak in proportion about freedom and responsibility. Not all of this was innocent. Marble can hide injustice as well as host justice. But the aspiration stood to make a city where you could feel, just by walking, that your measure matters. Myth even kept the stars organized. Constellations carry Greek names because sailors needed a sky that could be read: Orion, Andromeda, Cassiopeia, Pegasus. Planets take Roman names, and so the Greek gods walk there too by their other masks. Mercury, quick in his orbit, Venus bright at evening, Mars red with iron, Jupiter large and sheltering, Saturn slow, writing patience into the calendar. The weak in English borrows other gods, but in the Romance tongues, you can still hear Luna, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus counting out the days like steps in a procession. Language itself is a museum in which you stroll every day without noticing its exhibits. When you say hero, you step into the sandals of Heracles and Achilles and every quiet neighbor who holds a line when it trembles. When you call a thing titanic, you are remembering the old giants who challenged order and gave us a measure for ambition's scale. Narcissism carries a pool inside it. It warns that self-regard can be as drowning as any sea. Panic still has Pan in the first beat, the god of noon silence startled into shout. The word is a map of how the body sometimes misreads a rustle as a verdict. Call someone a giant, and you are walking with the gigantes, who taught that size is a question of scope, not only of height. You know Echo, from a nymph who learned the cost of repetition. Nemesis, from the goddess who keeps arrogance from poisoning a city. Atlas, from a bearer who lends his name to every book of maps and to every person asked to carry what is nearly too much. There is hypnosis in Hypnos, morphine in Morpheus, music in the Muses, arachnid in Arachne, serial in Ceres. To speak these words is to let the old stories move your lips into shapes set long ago. Myths are etched into etymology the way wind is etched into dunes, patterns made stable by repetition. Psychology kept the conversation going. Freud borrowed Oedipus to name a knot of love and rivalry. Jung read gods as archetypes walking our inner streets. We can disagree with them and still keep the gift, the sense that stories happen inside as well as outside, that a thunderclap can be weather or temper, that a labyrinth can be an office or a mind. Modern literature rearranged the masks. Joyce threading Ulysses through Dublin, Mary Renault returning Theseus to human scale, Toni Morrison summoning mythic weight to speak about memory and freedom. Comic books giving us Amazons and lightning wielders because new cities also need old signs. Cinema keeps remaking the voyage. The hero leaves home, meets helpers and monsters, descends, returns. Because the pattern is not fantasy. It is attention paying its dues to change. Science, too, likes old names when it wants to feel the scope of a thing. You will find Hermes in hermeneutics and Mercury in metallurgy, Vulcan, through Rome, in volcanoes, Saturn in the slow saturation of time, Saturnine, jovial in Jupiter's generous bigness, martial where iron meets purpose, venereal where love becomes a biology, mercurial where quickness is almost a temperament. Plutocracy gives wealth a god to answer to. Chimerical warns that a mixed creature may promise more than it can stand. Harmony keeps Harmonia's name to remind music that balances a family affair. Even in medicine and sleep, the old comfort persists. To hypnotize is not to conquer, but to invite the nervous system to set down its bundle. If we step back now and look at the long shape of this influence, what we see is not domination, but availability. The myths were always ready to be used by whoever needed them. Philosophers crafting careful ladders for thought, artists training the eye to love proportion, architects reminding law to carry itself well, politicians borrowing Jupiter's dignity and then being judged by it, poets asking the muses to keep memory bright, physicians building sanctuaries where sleep heals, teachers drawing the old map inside the new curriculum. They are tools, yes, but they are also mirrors. A city that invokes Athena is likely to ask itself if its schools are generous. A household that lights Hestia may notice whether dinner is a meeting or a performance. A nation that drapes itself in columns obliges itself to consider measure when passion surges. You might ask, with so many centuries past, are these not just fairy tales? Close your eyes and test the claim. When you face a decision and feel the pull of two goods, do you not stand at a crossroad that would please Hecate? When you put your phone down and step outdoors, and a sudden, unreasoning fear rises at noon in a field and then dissolves when you breathe, have you not met Pan and bowed to him? When you keep a promise that costs you, when you say, I gave my word and hold the line, are you not making a private oath in Zeus's old court of sky? When a craftsman takes a fraction longer to sand an edge so that a stranger's hand will find it kind, is that not Athena's politeness in wood? When harvests come in, paychecks, projects, friendships grown through steady attention, and you share, have you not thanked Demeter with a practical hymn? When sorrow knots your chest and a song or story loosens it enough to sleep, is that not Dionysus practicing medicine? The lesson is simple enough to rest on. Myths are not lies we outgrow. They are patterns we might grow into. They do not demand belief the way a lever demands a fulcrum. They invite recognition. They say, here is a way a human being can be brave without becoming cruel, clever without becoming sterile, joyful without becoming lost, sorrowful without becoming ruined. They give names to the inner weather so that, when it arrives, we can meet it politely and be good hosts to our own lives. Now, while your breath stays slow, notice how the old names touch the new world around you. The courthouse with its pediment and steps, the museum where a statue convinces stone to behave like flesh, the theater where a crowd becomes one careful animal, the campus quadrangle shaped like a forum, the medals called laurels, the torch passed at ceremonies, the marathon, a Greek place turned into a measure of endurance, The brand names that borrow Hermes for speed or Nike for victory. The space missions, Apollo, that lifted the eye and then the body. It is not that Greece lives on as a museum. It is that our habits still treat beauty and reason as siblings, still seat story next to analysis, still ask architecture to teach ethics without speeches. Inhale. Let philosophy, theater, art, and building stack themselves in your mind like calm terraces on a hillside. Exhale. Let Rome carry the stories forward. Let Renaissance painters wash them in light. Let modern languages keep their syllables alive. Inhale again. Feel the words you use. Hero, titan, panic, echo. Line up like small votive lamps. Exhale and rest in the idea that none of this requires strain. It asks only noticing. When you open your eyes tomorrow, the world will look contemporary. It is. But beneath the screen and the roadway and the calendar app, you will still be walking through proportion and pattern and names. If you keep even a little of this in your pocket, a coin with Athena's owl, a memory of chorus, the scent of bread and resin, the day may move with a steadier rhythm. And if your night brings dreams, do not be surprised if a god or two appears, not to command, but to accompany, teaching, once more, the quiet art of being human. I was taught that order does not arrive as a decree. It arrives as a struggle that learns to breathe. In the old telling, before our city had a name, the world was a layered hush, sky above, earth below, and in their vast embrace, a restlessness gathered. From that restlessness came the first rulers, the Titans, old powers, broad-shouldered ideas walking on two legs. They were not wicked. They were earliest, and the earliest is often heavy, like wet clay. Among them stood Kronos, time with a scythe of decision, a keeper who feared being displaced by what came after. Fear, like a tide, pulls back what should flow forward. When I first learned this, I heard it as thunder. Later, the priest taught me to hear it as family, sky and earth pressing their will into children, a son afraid to be more generous than his father, a world asking to change without shattering. The Titans held the frame tight, mountains like locked elbows, oceans like closed fists. Inside that pressure, a younger weather gathered. Born of hiddenness and shelter, Zeus grew under layers of secrecy, nurtured as all newness is, quietly, by hands who knew that loudness draws danger. His childhood was not thunder, it was waiting. And then the waiting ended. Newness must speak, or it dies of politeness. Zeus stepped out of his shelter and called the old order to a conversation in which no one wished to listen. The Titans would not yield. The younger powers arrived. Poseidon with the motion of deep water, Hades with the gravity that teaches limits, Hera with the dignity of bond, Demeter with the calm of grain, Hestia with the hearth that wants peace, Athena born in a flare of thought, Apollo in measured light, Artemis in cool shadow, Hephaestus in works fire, Ares in sharpened will, Aphrodite in the mercies that hold us together, Hermes in the quickness that carries news before harm. The air thickened with choice. You could say there was war. You could say mountains moved as if waking from stone dreams, that lightning learned to draw a line, that the sea unlearned patience and rose, that the underworld opened its careful vault and reminded everything that nothing can expand forever. But the priest asked me to tell it gently, because even victory needs sleep. So I will say this. The Titans were the first rhythm, slow, strong, undivided, and the Olympians were the second rhythm, quicker, articulate, able to keep time with many instruments at once. the world changed tempo. The older powers, feeling the new beat stealing ground, held harder. Atlas took the sky on his shoulders because someone must learn the art of bearing. Prometheus, Titan cousin who loved mortals, stole fire for us because someone must love what is small. Metis, the wisdom that swallows itself to be everywhere, became breath in Zeus's chest. Gaia, Earth, tried to settle the argument with giants, great answers that did not quite fit the question. Each move answered. Each answer asked again. Thunder practiced its grammar. Flash, pause, voice. In the sanctuary, as I polished bowls for a festival, I felt what the story means beneath the surface of names. We all know this struggle. The old way that kept us safe and the new way that lets us grow. The rule that prevented harm and the curiosity that now wants more than not harm. The stiff conviction in our shoulders and the learning in our hands. For a time, the world shakes as if uncertain which heart to follow. In that shaking, fear calls itself prudence and desire calls itself law. We stand between them and must breathe. The turning came, as turnings do, like a door that had been stuck and then suddenly yields to a careful push. Zeus did not simply break the Titans, he placed them. Some he lowered into deep custody, not out of hatred, but to keep their weight from crushing the new grass. Some he stationed at the edges, to hold the world's coat on the windy days. The sea learned to obey Poseidon's trident. 3 prongs, 3 thoughts, extent, depth, return. The earth learned to hold still for Hades, who taught keeping. The sky learned to listen for Zeus, who carried thunder like a gavel and used it not to frighten, but to gather silence before decision. The many younger ones learned their labor, to harvest, to heal, to guide, to sing, to cut, to mend, to speak, to soften, to defend. It was not need at first. It never is. But we call this moment order because afterward, the wind could pass through a grove without tearing it up by accident. And what of us, mortals, in a world newly divided into lanes and tasks? We felt the lanes underfoot and wanted to walk between them anyway. The gods arranged spheres, sea for the sea, sky for the sky, underworld for the kept, field for the sown. Yet humans are creatures who draw paths diagonal to every border. We invent boats to enter Poseidon's grammar, wings of words to climb the sky, rights to speak with the quiet kingdom below, plows to write calligraphy on the backs of fields. We want to consent to order and still keep a private key. The drama reaches its highest note here. Gods hold the frame. People ask for freedom inside it. Thunder listens. The sea watches. A lamp at a hearth burns patiently and says nothing at all, which is often the truest counsel. I once asked my teacher, why did Zeus win? He touched the rim of a bowl until it sang. Because thunder alone cannot rule long, he said. He learned the intervals. He did not speak all the time. He left space for the other voices. The Titans were strength without phrasing. The Olympians learned phrasing. Where to rest, where to rise. Law began to sound like a poem one could live inside. So the great battle, in the version I love best, is less a smashing than a tuning. The world becomes an instrument, strings tightened until they carry song rather than snap. And at the center sits a god who remembers the old power but chooses the new measure, an order that can include laughter and grain, oaths and hearths, city and sea. That order is not perfect. Even gods quarrel. But from that day forward, when thunder speaks, it does so for a purpose. And when lightning writes, it chooses its letters. Resolution. The world. After the storm. Approximately 3,500 to 4,500 characters. In the quiet that follows any battle worth winning, you hear small sounds first. The drip from eaves after rain, the hinge of a gate remembering how to swing, a child testing if the courtyard echoes again. After the Titans are placed and the Olympians seated, the world discovers its daily. Zeus lifts his gaze from war to oath. He becomes the sky's witness to our promises, a roof that does not leak. When we say we will, the air listens, and thunder stores the echo for hard days. Hera binds households not with chains but with customs, shared cups, widened tables, a sheet shaken over a bed like a small white flag of peace. Athena takes the spear out of the hand and puts a stylus there, then a tool, then a law rolled thin enough to read and thick enough to hold. Poseidon teaches the harbor to forgive waves without surrendering ships. Hades keeps the quiet rooms under everything, so gratitude has somewhere to aim. Demeter marks the year with bread. Hestia keeps beginnings warm. Apollo straightens light like a line of music. Artemis asks the noon to be kind to the animal who needs shade. Hephaestus mends what breaks. Aphrodite turns beauty from a mirror into a lantern. Hermes delivers the letter you addressed to tomorrow. Dionysus loosens the knot that kept the day from sleeping. Humans, feeling the frame, begin their older art, negotiation. We want to fish, and also write poems about fishing. We want to plant, and also sing. We want to swear, and also forgive. The new world gives us rooms for each desire and corridors between them. We learn to petition the gods not for exceptions, but for clarity. Show me the door that is already open. In that learning, freedom changes shape. It becomes less like a shout and more like agreement, not submission, not rebellion, but the choice to play in tune so that our song can be heard. The myths remember one more lesson. Every victory contains its responsibility. After the storm, the Olympians must keep speaking to one another, or the world slides back into loudness without listening. When war threatens to devour what it claims to defend, Athena puts a hand on Ares' arm. When Apollo's clarity becomes too bright, Artemis pulls a curtain of shade. When Zeus grows certain, Hera reminds him that dignity is sweetest when shared. The drama we inherit is not the old clash repeated. It is the art of maintenance, the patient chores of balance. And what of us? We keep exploring the edges, where sea meets land, where law meets mercy, where sleep meets waking. We ask our freedoms to be habitable, to fit inside a household, to fit beside a neighbor, to fit under the sky without cracking it. We do not throw away the Titans. We give them uses. The strength that once tried to rule becomes the pillar in a porch, the foundation under a school, the endurance with which we carry one another on hard days. The wildness that once rose as a challenge becomes the laughter in a marketplace that keeps bargaining human. The stubbornness that once blocked a river becomes the dam that saves a harvest, the wall that makes a garden possible. Old powers, new chores. With time, the story itself softens. Children learn it not as a threat, but as a map. They hear how the world learned to hold many tempos at once, and they practice the same. Study and play, speaking and listening, standing and resting. Festivals renew the treaty. Libations refresh the words. Theater lets us test the hinges of the heart. When lightning appears on summer afternoons, we count the seconds to thunder, not to measure fear, but to admire the phrase, flash, pause, voice. Somewhere, a priest still teaches a child to match breath to the rain. Somewhere, a woman turns a loaf out of an oven and the crust sings as it cools. A small victory that needs no audience. Close your eyes for a moment and picture the world after the storm. Hills rinsed and attentive, the sea breathing without struggle, columns shining with a patient clean. A peplos carried through streets by many hands, the theater's floor swept for evening. The harbor ropes coiled like sentences ready to be spoken. Freedom walks here, not as a conqueror, but as a citizen, pleased to be recognized by law and welcomed by mercy. The gods sit where they sit, not to fence you in, but to keep the weather from stealing your sleep. Inhale. Let the last rumble roll away. Exhale. Feel the pattern hold. Escalation has thinned to a thread of quiet. Order has ceased to shout and learned, again, to sing. We will carry this song into the night's gentler rooms, where meaning loosens without breaking, and where rest arrives as a friend, not a demand. I carried the storm and the lamp with me for years before I learned to give them their true names. One evening, after the sanctuary had emptied and the marble held the day's last warmth, I set my palm on the step and felt a recognition rise like a tide meeting shore. The gods were not strangers descending. They were movements of the soul standing up in the world so we could see them. Zeus was the shape my conscience takes when it refuses to bend the line of an oath. Athena was the texture of a thought arriving clean and kind at the same time. Demeter lived in the gratitude that turns bread into more than food. Dionysus was the loosening by which grief unclenches and laughter remembers how to breathe. Poseidon was the depth under every mood, the pull below the wave where feeling finds its true weight. Artemis stood wherever I learned to set a boundary that protects tenderness. Hestia was the warmth that says you may rest now. Hermes, curiosity on quick feet, taught me to carry messages between parts of myself that had stopped speaking. Aphrodite was attention made gentle enough to reveal beauty without demanding it. Ares was the heat of will purified of cruelty, the courage to act when delay becomes harm. Hephaestus hammered broken plans until they held again. Hades kept a room for sorrow where love could sit without spectacle. And at the crossroads, Hecate held the lantern steady while I practiced the art of choosing. When I saw them this way, the world did not shrink. It clarified. The myths stopped asking for belief and began offering a vocabulary. Each story was a mirror with a different light. Some mornings, I needed the sky's measure. Some afternoons, the field's patience. Some evenings, the theater's merciful exaggeration. Some nights, the quiet of a lamp's circle. I began to understand that the old tales were not reports from elsewhere, but maps for here. Tested routes through tempests of feeling and the long high weather of days that ask for endurance. The consequence of such seeing is simple and large. The myths become ours in the most intimate way. Not collectibles, not relics, but instructions for kindness, to others, to oneself, to time. When a promise tightened around me, Zeus lent his spine. When a problem knotted, Athena showed the thread's loose end. When my hands worked and no one watched, Hephaestus stayed until the edge felt right. When joy asked to be shared, Dionysus poured and watered the wine so morning would still be a friend. When a loss would not move, Hades kept watch without hurrying me. When I stood at a threshold, Hermes laid a coin of courage in my palm. In this way, the stories proved permanent. Whatever changed, city, fashion, language, These patterns kept arriving, recognizable as breath. And because they live as patterns, they do not compete with reason or with faith or with science. They companion them. Philosophy trims the hedge. Myth plants the garden. Law draws the road. Myth teaches walking. Medicine steadies the pulse. Myth shows where fear sits and how to speak to it softly. Art frames the window. Myth reminds the light what to do when it enters. Even sleep learns from them. The body unknots under a name it trusts. I thought for a time that such recognition would make the gods smaller. It made them nearer. To call Athena clarity does not banish her. It invites her to the desk. To call Demeter gratitude does not demystify bread. It blesses the next slice. To call Dionysus release does not trivialize the cup. It keeps it from drowning us. The sacred did not retreat. It stepped closer until I could feel it in the small hinge of a door that opens without complaint. Now the sanctuary dims. The last worshippers have gone. The broom has traced its patient figure 8. The brazier has folded red into ash. I stand at the threshold and listen. In the city below, someone laughs. Someone forgives. Someone sets a loaf to cool and hears the crust sing. Someone takes a deep breath before speaking and finds the right word waiting. 100 small liturgies, uncoordinated and in tune. This is the place where drama becomes rest. The Titans do their heavy work under the foundations. The Olympians sit where they sit and keep their chores. The human day, taught by stories, moves with a steadier gait. My fear of thunder has learned to count. My longing for beauty has learned to be gentle. My wish for freedom has learned to fit beside other lives without pushing them off the path. I bow, not low, not abjectly, just enough to feel the neck unstrain. And I understand what the priest meant when he said that a sanctuary is a teaching about care. So let the night widen. Let the constellations write their slow assurances. Let the sea breathe in its sleep. The city settles. The hill holds. The lamp's last circle closes. All the gods find their places, and their stories drift into the far-off hum of time. Inhale, and keep one name, whichever you need, quietly in your chest. Exhale, and let the others take their posts. The tales do not vanish. They become background music, steady, kind, ancient, and familiar, so that your own life can sing its line in peace. Set the story down beside you, like a book with a ribbon in its spine. Feel the page cool under your fingertips. Breathe in softly. Breathe out, softer still. We have walked through thunder and marble, through harvests and hymns, through theaters where the city borrowed one heartbeat for an evening. What remains now is not the noise of the tale, but its clarity. The way a lake, once the wind goes elsewhere, remembers how to show the sky. Philosophers argue and artists sing, yet both return to the same doorway. Myths are mirrors of the inner world. They are the careful names we give to familiar weathers. Joy arriving like sun on a tiled roof. Fear booming like a summer storm. Tenderness glowing like a small lamp in a patient room. Each of us carries a parliament of presences. Zeus, when we keep a promise because we said we would. Athena, when we find the clean, kind answer and lay it down without pride. Dionysus, when laughter loosens grief just enough for sleep to enter. Hecate, when we stand at choice and hold a lantern instead of a sword. They do not demand incense from us. They ask for recognition. Notice how the mirror works. You hear the thunder, and your mind does not stop at physics. It honors it, and then it remembers something older. The long count between flash and voice. The measure you learned as a child. The way courage can be a quiet rhythm. You see the sea, and you do not abandon tides to poetry. You accept their moons and mathematics. And then you feel Poseidon in the chest's undertow, that deep pull beneath emotions where steadiness lives. You light a burner in your kitchen at dusk, and a wave of ease arrives that is older than the stove. Hestia taking her seat again in an ordinary evening. You tie your shoes to step out into the glare of day, and a thought arranges itself into Athena's order. You can move through the city without snagging your spirit on every horn and headline. Even the small frictions of living soften when named. The sudden, breathless worry at noon that arrives for no reason. We have been warned about Pan, and we have also been taught the cure. Hold still, breathe slow, respect the quiet hour, and the startled heart will settle like a bird back onto a branch. The pride that stands too straight and forgets to bow. Nemesis walks the street with a light step. Call her by name, and she will teach the spine kindness before the world does. The self-regard that fixes us to our own reflection until we forget the faces of friends. Narcissus waits by the pool. The cure is water shared. Hand a cup to someone else, and the surface breaks into laughter. Let the present day come back to you, but more gently. Think of your morning routes, crosswalks, keys, an elevator that decides your pace for you. Notice how ancient habits accompany you, even here. At a courthouse with columns, law reminds itself to speak in measure. In a school with steps worn by many feet, memory protects the young like a grove protects spring grass. In a museum, stone becomes almost skin again, and you remember that to look with patience is a devotional act. A city park at lunchtime is a temple of Demeter in disguise. Bread broken, apples shared, a bench made into a table by good intention. A theater, be it a stage or a screen, gathers strangers into a single listening animal. For an hour, the heart studies itself without shame. The old names do not insist, they accompany. You need not chase the gods. They arrive in your gestures. When you send a message that clears confusion instead of multiplying it, Hermes has crossed the room. When you repair a hinge no one else noticed, Hephaestus stands beside your shoulder with a nod. When you step away from an argument because truth needs a cooler hour, Artemis lends you shade. When you hold a line against meanness without becoming mean, Ares is redeemed for a moment into courage that protects rather than prowls. When you forgive, Aphrodite walks through the air, and surfaces soften all over the room. Hold this thought without squeezing it. Myths are not cages. They are maps. They show paths through the interior country, shortcuts and scenic routes, bridges and ferries, places where the footing is slick, places where the view is worth the climb. You do not have to believe in them. You only have to try them on. Does your day walk more easily with Athena's patience? Does your evening loosen more kindly with Dionysus watered and wise? Does your week need Demeter's intervals? Work, rest, so harvest can actually happen? When something breaks that no apology can fix, will you let Hades keep watch while time does its slow medicine? Choose the map that fits and fold it into your pocket. Now let us make the connection softer still, breath by breath. Inhale and imagine the Acropolis breeze learning your face. Exhale and let the city's old noise step back until it is only a pleasant rumor. Inhale and place a small loaf on an invisible altar, not because bread requires worship, but because gratitude likes a shape. Exhale and feel the room warm by 1 degree. Inhale and lift your eyes to where the ceiling becomes a kind of sky. Exhale, and let thunder belong to the weather outside and the order within. Think of the choices waiting for you in the week ahead. Some are doors, some are gardens, some are bridges. Bring Hecate's lantern to each. Ask not for augury, but for kind timing. To answer when the answer is ripe. To listen until listening is complete. Think of the work your hands will do. Invite Athena to sit near the desk, Hephaestus to stand in the workshop, Demeter to season the kitchen, Hermes to keep the lines clear where words must travel. Think of the love you owe and the love you're offered. Let Aphrodite be a teacher of gentleness that doesn't melt the edges you need. Think of the fun you forget to permit. Let Dionysus open one window and then the next, so sleep can find you without effort. If sorrow keeps you company tonight, honor it. Set a chair for Hades, not to call darkness closer, but to give it manners. Sorrow with a place to sit does less wandering in the house. If worry rattles the shutters, ask Zeus to hold the roof steady while you rest. Roofs are his favorite lesson. If a tangled thought circles and circles, open the door to Athena. She turns knots into threads, and threads into patterns, and patterns into calm. If you feel lost, step to the crossroads and count 3 breaths. Hecate's patience often looks like your own. You may notice, as your breathing slows, that the room is not empty at all. The night has a texture, linen and shadow, a shape of quiet that fits your shoulders properly. Somewhere beyond the window, a tree makes its small decisions with the wind. Somewhere much farther off, the sea keeps writing itself into shorelines. Above all that, the constellations shift by degrees, too fine to see, and yet they go on with their grammar. You are not outside this. You are one of its sentences. Let us end with a blessing that is more like a promise. Not the promise that you will never fear or fail or forget, but the promise that patterns will be there when you reach for them. A hearth to relight, a chorus to rejoin, a field to rest and seed and reap, a temple that is simply a well-kept doorway and a whispered thank you. The old world is not behind you. It runs quietly alongside, offering handrails you can hold without looking. So, inhale. Let the thunder be both science and story, both pressure and presence, both cloud and Zeus keeping oaths. Exhale. Let the sea be both physics and Poseidon, both tide chart and depth of feeling, both moon-pulled water and the calm under waves. Inhale. Let the city around you arrange itself into Athena's proportion. Exhale. Let Dionysus, gentled, watered, untie the tightness at the back of your day. When your thoughts try to stand again, offer them chairs. When your breath tries to rush, give it a longer hallway. When your heart knocks, open the door as if for a late friend. The myths will not mind if you forget their names. They live in the kindness of your gestures. They live in the way you step around another person's tiredness, in the way you set your phone down to listen fully, in the way you set a small plate for yourself as if you were a guest worth hosting. And now, with the room softened and the night attentive, allow this final image to sit on the windowsill of your mind. Nike, the gentle winged one, not the trumpet of conquest, but the quiet of completion. She stands where effort has done enough and lays a finger to her lips, not to hush you, but to hush the day. She keeps watch over your sleep, not to enlist you in battles, but to crown your rest with a light wreath of peace. May your dreams be carried by calm victories, the kind where understanding replaces noise, where patience replaces hurry, where gratitude replaces want, May the gods, now recognized as rooms within you, return to their places and keep their good chores while you sleep. The world will go on turning with or without your worry. Let it turn. Inhale, a soft, steady sky. Exhale, a harbor of warm dark. Inhale, a heart that remembers your name. Exhale, a field at night, breathing. Good night. May Nike guard your dreams. Victory is quiet, not quarrel. A laurel of stillness, not a sword. Until morning opens like a slow, kind door. Let the night settle around you. Let the story step back. Keep only 3 small lights, Aegean waves, a quiet lyre, a gentle torch glow. Inhale and exhale. Aegean waves. They arrive, they return. Arrive, return. In, out. Count softly. 1, 2, 3, 4. In. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Out. Let the body learn the tide. Now the lyre. A simple line, a few notes, no hurry. A string touched. A sound that floats, then fades. Touch, float, fade. Inhale with the note. Exhale with the silence that follows. Now the torch. Small, steady, kind. Not a blaze. A promise. Its circle of light warms the air and does nothing else. You stand inside that circle. Safe. Uncomplicated. Warm. Again, the sea. Aegean waves. Dark water writing itself and erasing itself. In and out. Like breath. Like sleep. Beginning. Again, the lyre. A ribbon of sound. Thinner now. Lower now. The hand that played is gentle. The room accepts the quiet. Inhale. The last bright thread. Exhale. The thread dissolves. Again. The torch. A little sway. A calm heart. If a thought rises, hold it to this light. Watch it soften. Let it go. Shorter phrases now. Longer pauses. In. Slow. Out. Slower. Aegean waves. In. Outside. Nothing to do. Nothing to fix. The lyre rests on a knee. One more tone. A sigh of wood. Quiet. The torch becomes a star in your room. Not far. Not bright. Just there. In. Through the nose. Out. Through the mouth. Jaw soft. Shoulders heavy. Hands loose. If the mind wanders, give it the sea. If it speaks loudly, give it the lyre. If it worries, give it the torch. Now fewer words. More space between them. In. Outside. Wave. Light. Warmth. Athena watches from a high, kind distance. Order without effort. Hypnos waits by the door. Patient. Unhurried. Sure. You do not need to invite them. The breath has already done it. In. 4. Hold. 2. Out. 6. Twice more, each time easier. The bed is a little boat. The room, a quiet cove. The sea breathes with you. The world holds. If a door in the day was left open, let the night close it softly. If a word was unfinished, let the morning finish it for you. Nothing urgent remains, only rest. Last cycle. Aegean waves. Arrive. Return. Lyre. Touch. Float. Fade. Torch. Steady. Gentle. Warm. Now bless the hours ahead. Sleep peacefully. May Athena grant wise dreams, and Hypnos a soft and deep rest. Quietly, slowly, calmly, good night.